Welcome back to another episode of the Untitled Football Podcast, coming every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 o'clock in the morning, where we review and preview all the games using advanced analytics and a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, now we're into week number 6, I think. Actually, I'm losing track of it at this point. You know, the season's in full swing, as we already know. But as there's no Thursday game, let's get right into the 1 o'clock games. And let's start off with the Panthers versus the Bears. Bears knock off the Panthers 23-16 and cover 1.5 as they were coming into this game as underdogs, which I didn't really expect. So that's half the reason why I went with the Bears, and they might actually be a fundamentally better team than the Panthers. The Panthers didn't play well. And honestly, nor did the Bears. It's not like Foles was like they struggled offensively against a Panthers defense that hasn't really been good for most of the season, or isn't really good. So, I mean, the Bears continue to be the most fraudulent team to have such a great record ever. Maybe, it's like they're not a good football team. They're really not. So, I mean, the fact that they just keep winning is really interesting. I mean, I wouldn't say they're not a good football team because I think they actually have a pretty good roster, but they just don't have, I don't think they have a quarterback to actually be good. So, I mean, but Foles can be good in select games. Maybe not select games because it's not like it's a constant thing. It's kind of random when he's actually good or not. Like, he can be good at times, which makes them dangerous and more dangerous than they were with Trubisky, but how dangerous can they actually be, though, is the actual question here, because I don't know how good a Foles-led team can be for a full season, though I do think the supporting cast, the weapons, Darnell Mooney making some plays, emerging, Anthony Miller's still there, seems like he's being kicked to the wayside, Allen Robinson, who's amazing, one of the best receivers in the NFL, one of the best receivers in the NFL. Like, their supporting cast is there for them to be good, but the quarterback isn't good. And I think that holds the team back. Like, they have a good defense, but I mean, none of that really matters if you don't have a good quarterback, which Foles can be at times, but for the most part, it's gonna be more bad than good. But yeah, this 5-1 team has an average point margin of +2, which is barely above which is below the 3-3 49ers, which is also below what is the Cardinals record? They might also be 3-3. No, they haven't played yet. Well, they have played yet, but I previewed the games before Monday. I previewed the games on Monday, then I previewed the Monday night games after they happened on Monday. So, technically, it hasn't happened yet at the time I'm recording this part of the podcast. So, it's not. So, okay, they have a point margin that's lower than 2-3 Arizona. Potentially 2-4 because I chose Dallas in that game. But, yeah. So, they're not actually, that good, right? But, they keep winning these games. I don't know, man. And then the Panthers, on the other hand, they're 3-3, have a point margin of -5. So, I mean, I thought the Panthers were underrated coming into the season, relative to the fact that people thought they were going to have the number 1 overall pick, which I didn't think was possible the way the roster was actually built. Like DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson, who's better than I actually thought he was. Teddy Bridgewater, who wasn't that good this past game. I mean, the Bears won the game. They probably should have won the game anyway. And it's not like the Panthers are good. It's not like the Bears are good. Like, I don't think either of these teams are contenders. Obviously the Panthers aren't. The Panthers aren't, but I don't think the Bears are, a threat to anybody, really, though they have a good record. Which is weird. I don't know who they played this season. Excuse me. Who have they played this season? Because they played the Falcons, who just got their first win. The Giants, I mean, they haven't had they haven't had a difficult schedule so far. I mean, they played the Bucks, who they beat. That's really interesting. They're just a weird team, man. I don't even know. The Bears. I don't think they're that good though. But yeah, that's the Bears game. And let's move on to the next one. We're gonna go with Bengals versus the Colts. Colts defeat the Bengals 31-27. Bengals covered 7.5, like I thought they would, but like I didn't think they would. I said there was almost no way I see them winning the game. They almost won the game especially in the beginning of the game when they were like up by 21. They blew it. They really blew that lead and lost the game eventually. I mean, Phillip Rivers played a pretty good game. Had a pretty bad pick early. But after that, he was pretty damn great the whole game. Probably his best one of the season as they come from behind and beat the Bengals. Now, the fact that they have to come from behind and beat the Bengals, I think says a pretty good amount about this team. I don't know. The Bengals are tough, though. I think the Bengals are relatively a good team. Offensively, at least. Defensively, their offense is bad. But, yeah. I mean, Burrow was fine. He was okay. I mean, he wasn't, great. I mean, this definitely wasn't his best game. But, yeah, I mean, the Colts, I thought they were overrated coming into this game. I think they still are. I mean, people were talking about how tough their defense and good their defense was, but it's not like people just didn't. I mean, it's not like people must have forgot the schedule they played coming into the people must have forgot the schedule they played when they made those claims. Joe Burrow this week was actually relatively not even relatively, was actually very, very protected. He was not under pressure. He was kept clean as a whistle, really. Only under pressure 21% of his dropbacks, which is actually a really low amount. So he wasn't under nearly as much pressure. He only had 9 pressure dropbacks. He wasn't under pressure nearly as much as he typically is, and he wasn't even as good as he normally. This is not his worst game. It was just an okay game. But when his supporting cast from an offensive line standpoint gives him clean pockets, he doesn't even make the most of it by playing well. Let me check up on Joe Burrow's deep ball. He actually completed one today, which puts him... Damn it, I lost the page. Which puts him... it's probably still dead last, but it is what it is, though. I don't know if we should be concerned about his deep ball being, bad or not. He's at 10% right now, which is 34th out of 35 with the filter I have on right now. And adjusted deep ball completion percentage. He completed one where T. Higgins was wide open and didn't even score. That's crazy. Just slow. Just kidding. I'm not. But yeah, he was under pressure the least he has been in his whole career from a pressure percentage standpoint. And he wasn't that good. Now, no, I think the Bengals are a good team, though. You had T. Higgins emerging, though. I know that was a very stark diversion there, but it was T. Higgins emerging. I think they are a pretty good team for the future. I thought they would be better this year. I think I might have been a year early on them. But, I don't think they're terrible. I think they are a team that's probably going to play every team tough, or almost every team tough, except for Baltimore, who just beat the brakes off of them. But yeah, they almost won this game, and then they just kind of let it dwindle away. They scored 3 points in the second half, in the entirety of the second half. It wasn't great after the first half. Yeah, 3 points in the entirety of the second half. It wasn't great after that point. Joe Mixon had his one breakout game that went back to being irrelevant. I'm not going to talk about that from a fantasy standpoint because I don't do the fantasy takeaways anymore on the podcast. I might bring it back depending on people want it or not, but whatever. But yeah, I mean, they fumbled the ball a bit, and I mean, they didn't lose any, but they fumbled the ball some. Like, they just didn't have a great game in the second half of the game, and then the Colts came back, and they ended up winning the game, and Joe Burrow had a pretty bad pick to end the game. It wasn't that great of a game from Joe Burrow and the Bengals, especially in the second half. Oh, shit, because it looked really good in the first half, and then it just kind of fell flat from there, and yeah. So let's get on to the next game, though. Let's go with Jags versus the Lions, as the Lions steamrolled through the Jags 34-16 in a game which it was never necessarily close at any point in the game. It was a waxing from the start. Deandre Swift had his best game of the season. Finally got some carries, and he made the most out of them. Had more carries than AP. I mean, for like the first time all year. Which should not be something coming out in my mouth for a team that drafted a running back in the second round. Had a great game today, though. So, that's the main thing about it. And, you know who didn't have a great game today, though, was Gardner Minshew. I mean, he wasn't awful, but he also wasn't that good at either. Like, he was okay. Like, the volatility of Minshew, you don't know if you're getting a good or bad Minshew. He wasn't good today. He wasn't a disaster. He had a really bad pick in there. But I mean, he wasn't that good though, actually. But the Lions just steamrolled them. It was never really close. Matthew Stafford played a very pedestrian game, as they ran the ball a lot. They ran the ball 39 times for 185 yards on the day. They ran the ball a lot, 4.6 per attempt. But they ran the ball a lot, and they won. Galladay had a really efficient game. But, hey. The Jaguars are 1-5. Like, I thought they'd be better than, like, maybe the worst team. They're better than the Jets, I think, by a lot, but at the same time, you might not actually be that good either. So they might be worse than I thought they were, because I thought they'd be I saw them in the same light as the Dolphins from this past season. Though, to be fair to my take, the Dolphins did start off last season like 0-700, but yeah, the Jaguars are not a great team. We know that already. But they might be worse than I thought they were, who I was probably the highest on the Jags. I mean, it's not like I thought they would be like 16-0. I thought they'd win like 4 or 5 games maybe, though. It's still definitely possible, because Minshew is a volatile quarterback. But yeah, I mean, that's about all I want to say. It was just a flat game, really. It was just a steamrolling from the beginning. And DeAndre Swift had his breakout game. He could possibly be on waiver wires in some leagues, saying that he wasn't getting carries like that. In the beginning of the season, he was dropping passes. Like, he could possibly be someone on the waiver wire to target, potentially, because he might be on the waiver wire. I don't know if he is in any of my leagues. I don't think he is, actually. But he could be in some of yours, though. So, yeah. But let's go on to the next game, though. That's about all I want to talk about. Detroit versus the Jags. Vikings Atlanta is a bit more of an interesting game, as Atlanta, with their new coach, knocks off the Vikings 40-23 in pretty convincing fashion. They shut the Vikings out for the whole first half, but then the Vikings, in almost basically true Minnesota Vikings fashion, scored 23 points in the second half, like they did against Green Bay. And a lot of the games that they get blown out, they kind of wake up at the end where teams are just playing prevent defense. And speaking of prevent speaking of prevent, in the second half, the Falcons didn't go into a full prevent offense. Now, I ended up going with the Falcons. I ended up going with the Falcons because, the price was too good. Like, I didn't think they should be underdogs against the Vikings. They had Julio back, who was fantastic. They had Matt Ryan playing by far the best game he's had all season. Well, at least statistically. It's definitely the best game he had all season. But, yeah, they were really good throwing the ball. Matt Ryan was great. They kept their foot on the gas until, kind of the end when they started running the ball. They didn't run the ball well at all. 37 rushes for 99 yards. 2.7 yards per attempt. They didn't run the ball well at all. But they threw the ball extremely well. And they ended up reaping the benefits as they ended up winning the game by a lot. The Vikings, on the other hand, Alexander Mattison was actually pretty bad. Which isn't necessarily what I expected. Because he wasn't bad against the Seahawks. Granted, the Seahawks might have the worst defensive line in the NFL. But, he wasn't good. He wasn't good this week. And nor was Kirk Cousins. But he wasn't, terrible. He wasn't egregiously bad. And then Justin Jefferson still putting up numbers, big numbers. Which isn't quite what I expected. I attempted to trade him in fantasy so I can get off of him at his peak value because I thought a decline was inbound soon. There still probably is. He's at 20-something yards per reception on the season. That's still unsustainable in the long run of the season. But it looks like the decline might not be as sharp as maybe I thought it was going to be. But he still probably is going to be an elite receiver. Maybe a high-end wide receiver 2 potentially this season. Maybe he takes a bigger role next year. I don't know. From a volume standpoint, though, we did have double the amount of targets of any other player on the team this past game. So maybe that's not true. The Falcons, on the other hand, though, they played a much better game than they have all season. They played a more aggressive game in the second half of the game. Matt Ryan was really good. And, this makes them if they can play like that every game, because they've been leading in most of the games they played this season anyway. If they could play that way offensively every game, then I think that this team is actually a team that could win more games than, one. They play Detroit next week. The look-ahead was 1 point. Currently, it's at 3 points now after they won and beat the Vikings. That seems about right. I'll get more into that on 8 a.m. on Thursday with the preview podcast. So, yeah. Atlanta looked way better than they have all season. And, granted, it's against the Vikings, who aren't really a good football team. So, yeah. Atlanta could be back to, I wouldn't say back to form, because I don't think they're anywhere close to that 2016 peak Atlanta Falcons, peak Matt Ryan form that they were at. But I think they're at least back to the point where they're going to be a respectable team, especially if they don't blow these second half leads. If they come out aggressive and play to win in the second half, like I say a lot, the best way to win is to play like you're losing. Is play like you're losing, because when you're losing, you're playing to win. And then you might say, well, you're always playing to win. Well, sure, but I'm saying opposed to playing not to lose the game, like playing conservative and passive and all that type of stuff, to not lose the game and not playing aggressive to win the game, which Atlanta did for the most part in the second half until they started running the ball a bit more. And, they ran the ball on first down a lot, too. They didn't, the play calling, to be fair, wasn't that good. They just passed the ball really efficiently when they did. They ended up passing it a lot, but they ran the ball and passed the ball almost an equal amount. And the running game was actually, horribly inefficient, though they kept going to it. They ran 39 times and passed it 40. So, yeah. But on to the next game, though. Washington versus New York. Washington falls to the Giants 20-19. In the race for Trevor Lawrence, they pass as chestnut checkers, folks. The hyper-aggressive decision to go for 2, I'm a little bit more on the analytical side. I don't really like going for 2 in those situations. I mean, it puts more pressure on the other team. But you're also hinging the game on one play. So I don't like that play call. And even still, they could have got it if Kyle Allen ran. I don't even know if he would have made it to the end zone, to be fair. Like, Kyle Allen's not that athletic. There was space, but he's not like a. I don't know if he would have made it there, to be honest. But they ended up losing the game. I mean, I don't hate it, but I'm not a big fan of those calls at the goal line. Ron Rivera did do some other stuff. He went forward on 4th down and all that. I mean, Ron Rivera was aggressive. And his aggressiveness ended up getting the best. I wouldn't even say it got the best of him. It just didn't necessarily work out in the case of that last play. But I don't hate the decision, though. Ended up losing the game. I mean, their offense is still, putrid. It's still a disaster. And their defense, for the most part, this season has also been a disaster. Their defense was heavily overrated, I think, coming into the season because of their D-line, though they have, one of the worst secondary units. And even still in all that, Kendall Fuller's been amazing this year, though. Had a couple of picks. I mean, most of which were gift-wrapped to him, but had a couple of picks nonetheless. And for an Antonio Gibson fantasy owner, the fact that he's not getting the carries anymore like he used to, it's really he's not getting the receiver role either. McKissick had more targets and more carries, which isn't quite what you want to see. Oh no, he had more carries than McKissick. But McKissick was just better today. So, yeah. Anyway, though, Kyle Allen, he was better than he was last game, though, he wasn't like that. He wasn't that good, though. He was better than he was last game. And then, Daniel Jones, he was fine. This game is just like a battle of two terrible teams. And Washington just happened to be worse because, they are worse. Like I said in the preview podcast, I don't see too many teams they can beat, actually. When you look at, if they play Dallas next week, Dallas is only 3.5-point favorites. Now, at the time I'm recording this part of the podcast, the game actually hasn't happened yet for Dallas. Which there might be some movement because if they win, like I think they do, against Arizona, then there's almost no way they're coming into this game as 3.5-point favorites because Vegas loves Arizona. But Dallas on the look ahead was 4.5-point favorites. Washington, after having a pretty terrible performance against the Giants of all teams and still losing, is 3.5-point underdogs now, moving down 1 point. If you look at this game top to bottom, what area is Washington better than? What area is Washington a better team than Dallas in? Because it's definitely not a clear area. Andy Dalton's better than Kyle Allen. The receiver core for Dallas is way better. The O-line is better for Dallas, even though they're injured. So Tyron Smith is back though. The O-line's better. The only area is defense, and that won't necessarily matter in this matchup when, Washington's probably going to have no answers for Dallas' secondary, and Washington's offense is the worst in the NFL, so they'll probably look better than they have all season against Dallas, but I don't think they'll look good. So what area is Dallas better at then than Washington? Literally none. So the fact that they're only 3.5-point favorites is kind of wild. But yeah, they lost to the Giants. And, the Giants aren't good. So this is a terrible sign for Washington. or a good one if you want to look at it on the bright side of getting one game closer to Trevor Lawrence and years of success potentially, as he is I think he is that good. He might be better than Andrew Luck. Like right now, his accuracy is insane right now. He has better physical traits than Andrew Luck did, on top of having like all the other stuff on a similar level to Andrew Luck. But like Andrew Luck was running a pro style ish offense, not even pro style ish, like a full traditional pro style offense, where Trevor Lawrence is doing some things that he probably won't be doing as much in the NFL. Though he does have a pretty good amount of those NFL throws, in quote unquote. I'm going too deep into Trevor Lawrence right now. Mainly because if you didn't know, I don't know if I've ever said this on the podcast. And you might. But I never said this on the podcast. I am a Washington football team fan. I don't think I've ever said that on the podcast. So, when I get to talk about our future quarterback, I'll take the opportunity. But they lose to the Giants, and it's looking bleak. On to the next game, though. Baltimore versus the Eagles. Eagles fall to the Ravens, 30-28. They covered the spread, like I said they would, and they ended up losing the game. And this was a really, really weird game because it really looked like they were going to run away with the game. They were up 17-0 at half. The Eagles looked awful on offense. And then they came around in the second half of the game and played a better offensive game. It's not like they were great, but Wentz. He was whatever. They ended up coming back though. Most of their offense was like penalties, and their defense was like penalties. Like the Ravens found themselves in a pretty good amount of like 1st and 30. Like most of them were on like the same possession. But they found themselves in a lot of, like, 1st and 30 and 1st and 35. Like, penalties killed the Ravens. That's kind of the only thing that saved the Eagles in this game. Lamar, for the first half, he was really good. The second half, it was not so good. But the first half is really good. Made some really good throws out of the pocket. Made that little sidearm juke thing to Tim Boyle. Like, he was not awful passing the ball, but he wasn't good. He wasn't like spectacular either. Like he hasn't been an amazing passer this year, and they have ramped up his volume. And I wouldn't want to say he can't pass at high volume, because I think one factor we all like to exclude is the fact that when you actually look at the Ravens receiver core, it's actually not good. Like just the receivers. You have Mark Andrews, good tight end, but like other than like excuse me, the actual receiving weapons aren't that good. So when you try to ramp up the passing volume, you do put yourself in a weird situation because your team is actually built around you running the ball. So when you're not running the ball as efficiently, which Lamar actually ran the ball really well, probably the best game running the ball of the season for Lamar Jackson. Ripped off some really good runs, some really long runs, 100 yards on the game running the ball. Passing it, he hasn't been that good though. Like I said, he wasn't awful today. He made some pretty good throws, also missed a couple, but like he hasn't been the same level of passer he was last week. But Lamar Jackson though, he wasn't terrible though, because like if you look at the adjusted completion percentage, which factors out like the drops and stuff, he goes from 59 to 70 to 78, which was 8th on the week. 78.3, which is 8th on the week. Like he wasn't awful passing the ball. Like he was actually pretty good in a way, but not spectacular. He was fine. He's not throwing the ball as well as he was last year, though, especially the efficiency, but we kind of knew that was going to drop off, though. And they've ramped up the volume, too, because the running game hasn't been nearly as efficient as it was last year, which I also said it wouldn't be either, and a lot of people said it also wouldn't be either. Like, if you were banking on the Ravens to be the same team they were last year, then you were, like, not fundamentally wrong from a process standpoint, because it was pretty easy to understand that they probably weren't going to be the same team they were last year. So the fact that they're not the same team they were last year shouldn't really surprise people because regression was inbound. They were hyper efficient in every aspect of the game, which is normally going to come back to earth, and it has. Now Lamar, I mean, he's been like pretty solid throwing the ball this season overall, but he has had a couple of awful games and a couple of good games. Like, he's been all over the place. Like, he's probably closer to that Cam Newton type deal than I may have thought he was coming into the season, I guess. Like, he's closer to that Cam Newton mold than he is, like... I mean, he's more accurate than Cam Newton is and was. Maybe not is. Well, Cam Newton actually wasn't accurate at all this past week. I'll get into that when I talk about their game. But, I mean, he's more accurate than Cam Newton, like, ever was, excluding this past season. Like, he has been and is more accurate than Cam Newton. So I don't think he is that Cam Newton mold of quarterback, but, I mean, from a rushing standpoint, sure, but, yeah, the Eagles played a better game offensively themselves in the second half. They put up a bunch of points. I mean, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside finally got a touchdown. Got two of them, actually, after picking up a Miles Sanders fumble on a huge run and then getting one in the end zone. It was pretty wide open. I mean, the Eagles, I mean, they're struggling. They're struggling hard through the injuries. Every year, I don't know what it is with the Eagles, but they always get a ton of injuries. Their receivers are down. O-line is down. But yeah, it was a closer than expected game from Philly. So, and most of it was due to penalty yards and some I wouldn't even really call it garbage time per se, but in a way it was. So yeah, that's the Ravens versus the Eagles. On to the next game though. Have the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Cleveland Browns. The Steelers ran right over the Browns, winning 38-7 in a massacre of a lifetime. Baker Mayfield was awful today. Like, dreadful. Had some really bad picks. He was terrible. And kind of like how I expected it to be, like kind of how I said it was going to be in my predictions. A lot of the money was going to Cleveland, which I never thought made sense. And I was proven right because I mean, they beat the shit out of him. So it's not like Baker damn. I think I'm good now. But it's not like, it's like they didn't even, like the Steelers, they got a ton of pressure. But even when Baker wasn't under pressure, like he was still like bad. Like the first interception was like a quick game, complete misread, toss it right to Minka Fitzpatrick, who basically sat on that route the whole play. Like it was awful. Like Baker was terrible today. Like really, really, really bad. Or yesterday, whatever. He was awful. Like terrible. And like Big Ben, he didn't throw the ball that much, so it was fine. He really just managed the game. They ran the ball 37 times. So, I mean, that's something. Chase Claypool, another guy who I tried to sell high in fantasy. No one wanted to trade for him, man. The fuck, come on, bro. He's still performing. Led the team in target. No, he didn't lead the team in targets, but he led the team in catches and yards. Or tied in catches with James Washington. Led the team in yards. I mean, it is what it is now. Like maybe he is their number 2. I wonder where Deontay Johnson's gonna play when he comes back. So yeah. But the Steelers play up against the Titans next week, and that line has had some major movement as the Titans were favored coming into the game. Were favored on the look ahead, and that line has flipped all the way to the Steelers after the Steelers beat the Browns. I don't know if that's Because I don't know if that game requires that big of a line movement. Like the Browns are good, but they're not that good. Well, Baker Mayfield isn't. I think the team itself is, but I don't think the quarterback is the most important part of the team. And when he's kind of not good, then the rest of the team will suffer because of that. And against a team that plays similar to the Baltimore Ravens and the Steelers, I kind of thought this game was going to get ugly. I said they're going to get pressure. I said it's going to get ugly. They got pressure. And even when they didn't get pressure, it was still ugly. It was just an ugly game. Now, next week, the Browns go up against the Bengals again, which could be a bit more of a bounce-back game, kind of like it was for the Ravens. Like, they'll beat bad teams and they'll lose to good teams. Basically what the Browns are this season. So, I don't think the real threats or contenders to really anybody, but it is what it is, though. The Steelers continue to be undefeated. They've had one of the easiest, if not the easiest schedule coming into this game, though. Like the Giants, Broncos with Jeff Driscoll. I mean, the Texans, I think they're fundamentally better than maybe their record was, but just the combined record of the teams they played, the Giants had 0 wins coming into this week, have 1 now. Broncos have 1 win. Or 2 wins now that they beat the Pats. 2 wins. The Texans have 1 win. The Eagles have 1 win. Like, amongst those teams, they're not good teams. And they beat them. Barely beating Jeff Driscoll. Barely beating Deshaun Watson and his Eagles. And, I mean, kind of barely beat the Eagles. Wins through a pick at the end of the game, which basically ended it there. And then Chase Claypool put Nate Gary in a blender, and it was over. But, yeah, they go on to face the only other undefeated team as well. I think both of these teams are a bit worse than their record. Steelers and Titans, that is. But I don't know if the Steelers are actually like bad. But like when I say they're not as good as their record, like I don't think they're an undefeated caliber team. Because there's teams that I think are much better than them that aren't undefeated. But, yeah, they've had a really easy schedule. And the Browns included, too. I mean, they're probably the best team that they've played. But, Baker and the Browns had an easy schedule coming into that game as well. So, yeah. Well, let's go on to the next game, the overtime high-scoring thriller. Texans versus the Titans, an AFC South battle that goes to overtime, and the Titans win 42-36 and cover 3.5. And I mean, Deshaun Watson. Let's start off. Deshaun Watson was like great today, and it still didn't matter after they lost the game. They still lost the game. Even though Deshaun Watson was amazing. Deshaun Watson deserves better. That's all I have to say. They ran the ball a good amount to no diminishing returns, I'll say. 3.4 per carry as a team. The running backs combined for under 3 yards per carry. Deshaun Watson's the only thing bringing that up. I mean, the offense in the last 2 games, well, they weren't that good against the Jags, actually. But they looked pretty damn good today, though. This was a Will Fuller game and not a Brandon Cooks game. I mean, the receiver core isn't bad. And, I think last week, it was in the last podcast that I said Deshaun Watson might be a bit overrated in terms of, he might be a bit more supporting cast dependent than we might have thought he was. But it's not like the receiver core is bad here, and he hadn't been good until today, which is interesting. So, yeah, but it's not like the Titans did anything to, no one stopped anyone. It's not like the Titans, struggled from the Titans standpoint, because the Titans have been a little bit fraudulent. Their defense hasn't been that good this year. I mean, they shut down the Bills, but their defense hasn't been that good this year other than that game. Their offense has been phenomenal. They're first in EPA per play now on offense, which is crazy. So, I mean, yeah, Tannehill's been playing amazing this year as well. And Derrick Henry, I know I talk about running backs not mattering that much a lot of the time, but Derrick Henry ran the ball at 9.6 per carry. which, for reference, would have been the highest per attempt for any passer this past week. Like, if Derrick Henry can run like that, yeah, they'll be great, but he hasn't ran like that all season. Like, he hasn't had one game over 4 yards per carry until this week. Oh, wait, he had one game against the Vikings. But other than that one game against the Vikings, and this week, well, I mean, they only have 5 games left, but they only have 5 games played, but like, he hasn't been good all season except for this one game. And they went to him on the goal line to finish the game, and he did it. Mike Vrabel doing this did the 12 men on the field thing to get more get more time on the clock. You know, he's a good coach in terms of doing stuff like that and time management and playing with the other team, like we saw what he did against Belichick. Like, he does that. Like, you know, he's the best Belichick disciple. And I don't think it's particularly close. I mean, Joe Judge is bad. Bill O'Brien's fired. I mean, the list of successful ones is pretty short in the NFL. I mean, because, like, Saban is kind of, well, not really a disciple, but, you know, Saban, he's been amazing at the college level. But, yeah. Oh, Flores. I think Flores is pretty good. Patricia's bad. Flores is good. O'Brien's bad. Joe Judge is bad. Well, I don't think O'Brien's that bad as a coach. Like, he was an awful GM. I don't think he was a terrible coach. But, yeah. I mean, Belichick, this isn't about... But, like, yeah, the Titans, I don't know if they're good or not. Like, their defense isn't that good. Their offense is great, which is what matters more. Especially in an NFL where not too many teams in the NFL actually have a good defense. So, if you can score, you should be fine. And the Titans can score at a high rate. Especially with Tannehill playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL again. Tannehill leaves Adam Gase, and then he's phenomenal. Sam Darnold could do the same. Free Sam Darnold. But yeah, the Titans generated a higher EPA per play running than passing. But I mean, that makes sense when Derrick Henry would have had the highest yards per attempt passing the ball. I mean, would have had the highest passing yards per attempt. Like, his rushing average per attempt was higher than every passing yards per attempt. Like, Derrick Henry was great today for, like, the first time all year. Tannehill was also great, as he's continued to be great the whole season. And so was Deshaun Watson. It just didn't matter. They ended up losing the game. They had a chance where they could have basically put the game away, going for 2 on their touchdown, which then, on the touchdown before the Titans came and marched down and scored their touchdown to send the game to overtime, they could have went for 2 there, possibly put the game away, but they didn't do that. It ended up biting them. It ended up killing them in the end because they ended up losing the game in overtime. Derrick Henry ran it in, and they won the game. So, yeah, the Titans move on to be undefeated and go up against the Steelers, in which they're 1-point underdogs next week. And the Texans go on next week to play against the Packers, where they come into that game as 3-point underdogs to the Packers. I think that's a bit low, but yeah. On to the next game, though. Denver Broncos versus the New England Patriots, the game that was supposed to happen last week. And they're getting pushed back to this game, to this day at 1 o'clock. And the Broncos surprisingly win. It's not like they were good. It's like this is a bunch of games where these teams just aren't playing well, but the other team just played worse, so they won the game. I mean, like, Drew Lock wasn't good. Like, the team didn't perform well offensively at all, really. I mean, they didn't score a touchdown. They didn't score the ball. And they still beat the Pats. The Pats, maybe I underestimated the fact that they're coming off of, like, canceling all their practice. Like, they didn't look good. Like, they didn't, like they looked as if they canceled all their practices for, like, the past couple of days. Like, Cam Newton, basically, like, his first playing action back was this game. And he looked awful. He was terribly inaccurate. Like, this was, like, the game that every Cam detractor would tell you Cam is. This was not a good game. And they ended up losing because they played like shit. And they had to rely on Cam to make throws at the end of the game, and he didn't make them. I mean, the Broncos weren't good. What was it? They had the 29th highest, the 29th. They were 29th in EPA per play on offense. The Panthers were the Patriots were 24th. Even though Cam didn't play good, nor did Drew Lock. This was just an ugly ass, terrible game from both sides. And I mean, to be fair, I said the same thing about Cam's first playing experience back. I mean, Drew Lock at least practiced, but it wasn't Drew Lock's first game back. I mean, he wasn't good. I don't think Drew Lock is good, but I mean, they won the game, and there's gonna get blown out of proportion. Oh yeah, they beat the Pats. Look at the Broncos, and I think that was reflected in the line movement for their game next week. I think. Do they even play next week? They play Denver, but no, it was only worth a half a point. Like they lost. They went from 10 to 9.5. I thought it was a bit bigger. I don't. I mean, whatever. I mean, I feel like they should move. Like, I mean, it's not like they play well. So moving the line doesn't even make sense in that situation. They didn't play good. They won the game, but they didn't play good. Like their performance on the field wasn't worth half a point. Like what? But it was worth 2 points for the Patriots as they went from 5.5 point favorites to 3.5 point favorites against the 49ers. That's an interesting game. Might be the best game of the week that week, honestly. So, I mean, yeah, shit. Whatever. I mean, the Pats are kind of, speaking of the 49ers, the Pats are kind of in the same spot the 49ers were in coming into this week. Jimmy Garoppolo comes back from injury, doesn't play well, bounces back against the 49ers, kind of. I mean, against the Rams, kind of. I'll get into that a little bit later. Like, Cam is probably in a similar situation of he had COVID, they closed their facilities, he didn't get that many reps of practice coming into this game, and now next week against the 49ers, he could be looking for a bounce back spot for the Pats. But that's an interesting game, though. I don't know. I don't think the 49ers are that good, so I don't know. We'll see. And, yeah, let's go on to the next game, though. The start of the 4 o'clock slate? Yeah, Miami versus New York, the game of the year. Miami Dolphins defeat the Jets 24-0. They covered 8.5. The Jets, Flacco took a 50-yard sack. The Jets are bad. Like, I think Washington, I always say Washington's going to get Trevor Lawrence. Like, I don't think anybody's as just depressing as the Jets. So, Miami wins the game. I don't feel like talking about this that much. Ryan Fitzpatrick threw 3 touchdowns. He wasn't really that good. He threw 2 picks. Had a couple. Got away with some other stuff. He wasn't good, and yet still they just trounced the Jets. Now, granted, they didn't score after a certain point in the game, but yeah, Myles Gaskins had his best game of the season in terms of from a per carry standpoint, and so did Frank Gore. But from a per carry standpoint, Myles Gaskins at 5.2 per carry. But Myles Gaskin is a good running back, but Myles Gaskin's there is no but. Myles Gaskin's a good running back. Tua time. Tua finally plays. Tua was 2 for 2 throwing the ball. It's about time we got to see Tua. He didn't do anything really, but he was he didn't do anything. He was in the game for 2 throws. And, that's about all that's worth note of this game. The Jets are fucking awful. So, yeah, Joe Flacco is not better than Sam Darnold. At least we know that. So, I don't think they're any worse than they were with Darnold. They might have scored once with Darnold. Actually, I don't even know at this point. The Jets are just fucking ass. Joe Flacco was like dog shit. It's whatever. At this point, I don't even know if I should even talk about the Jets game anymore, unless they win or something. But let's go on to the next game, though. Talk about an actual good game, on paper at least, because the Packers got the shit beat out of them by the Bucs. The Bucs win 38-10, cover 3 points. I mean, the Packers just didn't look good. They just didn't look good. Aaron Rodgers took a ton of sacks. He only took 4. I felt like he took way more than 4. But this game, he had a higher average snap to pass than he did in every other game of the season. Like, he was at he was at like 2.4 coming into this week. And then this game, he had by far the highest at almost 3. At almost 3 seconds average snap to pass. And it resulted in a lot of sacks, a lot of pressure. He was awful throwing the ball, too. Missed some throws. He put the ball in harm's way more than you would expect from an Aaron Rodgers game. I mean, the offense overall was bad, but they ran the ball well. It didn't matter, not a single bit. They scored 10 points as they got the brakes beat off of them by the Buccaneers, the Buccaneers offensively, from a play calling standpoint, maybe more of a game script standpoint, aren't that good. Like, they were running the ball on first down a ton, put themselves in the hole by going basically 3 and out twice in a row, and then the offense, the play calling for their offense isn't that good. But Tom Brady is playing so amazingly right now that it doesn't really hasn't really mattered. They have to rely on Brady to make a ton of crazy throws into some tight windows down the field. They're relying on Brady to just play. They're relying on Brady to just be great, which I don't think is the greatest strategy for a 43-year-old quarterback, which could backfire in the playoffs or at some point in the season. I don't think the play calling for their offense isn't that damn good. Brady's just playing so well. And Ronald Jones, he's a good running back. I always said, not always, but in the preview podcast, I said, is Leonard Fournette even better than Rojo? Leonard Fournette hasn't even played. Gronk had his best game of the year. All of Brady's weapons were here. He didn't have his best game throwing. He didn't have his best game throwing the ball, but he was still pretty good, though. Gronk had his best game, made some contested catch scenarios, caught some balls in some contested catch scenarios. That's about all he can do. I don't think he can separate from anyone. PFS Eden Hardest said he runs routes like Drake from the Laugh Now and Cry Later video. There's some merit to that. He's basically Jason Witten with some contested catch ability, because he's basically power walking down the field when he has the ball after the catch. Godwin was fine. He was used mostly on some screens and short stuff. And Mike Evans had 1 catch. Didn't have a touchdown today, as he normally has this season. 1 fantasy point. In a standard, not PPR. But yeah. It was to be honest, I didn't watch the whole game. So excuse me for tuning out when Tim Boyle checked in with 7 minutes left in the fourth. Excuse me. But yeah, they just got the shit beat out of them, man. They just got beat up, taken to the barnyard behind the shed, and just beat up. Now they play the Texans next week, which is a prime spot for a bounce back game. I'll preview that a bit later, and the week, Thursday at 8 a.m. So yeah, let's go on to the next game, Sunday Night Football. 49ers versus Rams. 49ers beat the Rams 16-24. And they came into this game as underdogs. I thought that the Rams would cover this easily. In a way, I think both teams aren't that good. The Rams have 4 wins. The Rams have 4 wins, and all 4 of which came against Washington, Dallas, New York Giants, and the Eagles, the NFC least. And then the 49ers' 3 wins came up against the Giants, Jets, and the team that beat all the NFC East teams. the Rams or the 49ers probably really aren't that good, really. So, I mean, okay, Jimmy G had a better game. It's not like he really had to do anything. He had a 1 ADOT, and when he was passing, most of his passes were behind the line of scrimmage, and his passes that were past the line of scrimmage weren't necessarily accurate. Jimmy G has been awful this season, and the 49ers have suffered because of it. The Rams, on the other hand, they looked pretty good against some shitty teams, and against the one team they played, I mean, they almost beat the Bills. I mean, the Bills, to be honest, might be overrated themselves, but whatever. Yeah. The 49ers won the game. At halftime, they had, more, almost double the amount of yards after the catch than the Rams had total. The Rams just had trouble moving the ball. And they also had some drops in there and some pretty big plays, too. They're not that good. They're really not that good. So, yeah, the Rams are, and the 49ers are, they're really not, both of them aren't really that good of teams. The Niners, I think the Niners might be better, but I don't even know at this point. I don't think either of them are really contenders, unless Jimmy G can get his shit back together, and then maybe, but I don't think either of them are really threats to the NFC anymore. I don't really know who is at this point. It looks like it might only be the damn Seahawks at this point. And the Bucks. I forget the Bucks. The Seahawks and the Bucks. My preseason Super Bowl prediction was Bucks-Chiefs, which might come to fruition here as, the Bucks look good. They have a really good defense, which isn't really something you want to rely on, but they also have they have the weapons to be pretty good on offense. The play calling isn't there yet, and it probably won't be. So, they could be an issue. I don't know who is going to win the NFC or the AFC. Both conferences seem pretty open at this point. But, yeah, let's go on to the next game. Kansas City Chiefs versus the Buffalo Bills. The Chiefs beat the Bills and cover a line that actually went from 3 to 5. The line actually moved out a pretty significant amount, and the Bills lost. The Bills, the last 2 games, have put up 23 points combined in the last 2 games after their offense looking electric throughout the first 2 games of the season. Now, this isn't maybe they were a bit overrated. They only played the Dolphins and the Jets. The Dolphins actually aren't that bad, though, but the Jets, the Rams, who've only played NFC East teams that they almost choked the 28-3 lead against. Maybe the Bills were a bit worse than we give them credit for. Josh Allen didn't necessarily play a bad game. He had some really good throws that were dropped. And he also had a really good throw early in the game to John Brown that wasn't dropped but deflected after the defensive back made a really good play on a really good throw. But the game definitely started off, the first possession of the game for the Bills definitely started off like it was going to be a bad one for the Bills and Josh Allen as he threw 3 straight passes, all of which were pretty inaccurate. But then Mahomes came back down and did the same thing on his first possession. Mahomes ended up bouncing back from it. But I don't know why I get the sense that the Bills don't even trust Josh Allen at times. They give him so much short stuff to try to come back from these big leads. They're trying to dink and dunk their way back into the game. They did the same thing against Tennessee as well. Do they not trust him in late game situations? I don't think they attack downfield enough in those situations to be to actually come back and win the game. As they didn't do it this game, and they ended up losing it. I don't think it. They probably would have mattered. The game was actually pretty close throughout the whole thing. Josh Allen ended up throwing an interception, which ended the game, but I didn't think he played that badly, honestly. It started off, dreadful, but then he turned around and actually made some pretty good throws and did a lot on the ground today, but it didn't matter. And the Chiefs just showed why you don't sign Le'Veon Bell or why you don't draft the first-round running back. You can look at it 2 different ways. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is playing amazing right now, so signing Le'Veon Bell doesn't make sense. But I mean, drafting a first-round running back when you can get Le'Veon Bell on the open market also doesn't make that much sense either. But it is what it is, though. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is amazing. He had 8 point something yards per attempt. It could have went down due to some carries later in the game, but for most of the game he was at 8.1 per carry, which is higher than what Mahomes was throwing. Mahomes has actually been in some games has been a pretty low ADOT type of guy. And then Mahomes is doing Mahomes stuff that throw outside the pocket where, he kind of probably could have stayed in the pocket a little bit longer, but whatever. And then he had that little spin around run thing. Mahomes is great. Mahomes is great. He's amazing. And he continues to show it week in and week out as the Chiefs move on to 5-1 or 5-1. And the Bills lose to the only two good teams they've played so far, which is alarming for Bills fans, or should be. I know they think Josh Allen is Jesus, but he didn't play that bad today, but I know they think he's Jesus, and he does no wrong, and the Bills are amazing. Maybe we should have took into account the strength of schedule a bit more than we actually did. Because, who did they play? They played the Jets, the Dolphins. Like I said, I think they're a bit underrated. They hadn't played many even good teams up to this point of the season. So, I think they might have been. They played the Raiders, who aren't that good. Though they have a pretty good record, they aren't really that good, though. Maybe we overrated them coming into this game. The spread was actually pretty wide, though, so maybe that's not true. But, yeah. Let's go on to the next game, though, with the Cardinals versus the Cowboys. This game was a damn near complete disaster from both sides from the get-go. Early in the game, the Cardinals were so ass on offense, but the Cowboys managed to be even worse. In the beginning of the game, at least, it wasn't necessarily Dalton's fault. He wasn't seeing the field well. He threw the ball pretty, but he looked kind of Baker Mayfield-esque in the pocket today, which isn't what you want to be. But they didn't get any help from the coaching and all that type of stuff. Coaches do this very running back centric offense. The very first possession, I thought Dallas was gonna win this game. I thought the drop off from Dak to Dalton wouldn't be that big. It's been pretty big, low sample size, but yeah, I didn't think it'd be that big. But I thought they'd win the game, and then when I realized they weren't going to win the game was when they went with one of the worst opening sequences on their first drive. They ran the ball, they flipped out a swing pass to Zeke for a total of 1 yard, and now you're in 3rd and 9. This is why the strategy of trying to run to protect your run early downs to protect your quarterback in air quotes doesn't work, because you put yourself in those situations, which they put themselves in multiple occasions. Then Zach Martin goes down. The pass protection was horrendous. Dalton was under pressure a ton. Some of it was forced on his own by hesitating and double pumping and all that type of stuff. But overall, it wasn't good. Overall, it wasn't that good. And the play calling and shit was just bad. And then Dalton had a touchdown drop. Dallas was awful. Dallas was awful today. The Cardinals' offense, on the other hand, wasn't really that good either. Kyler Murray, 140 of his 188 passing yards came on 2 plays. That big run after the catch from D-Hop, and that big run after the catch from DeAndre Hopkins, and then that big bomb that Christian Kirk. What a great game. And that big bomb to Christian Kirk. Other than that, their passing offense was very dormant. They have 40 yards outside of those two plays, which is a really, really low amount. And Kenyon Drake finished the game with 100 yards. He was similar in terms of the fact that he really only had 2 good runs as well. So the Cardinals offense continues to not be good, passing at least. I mean, they ran the ball really well, though. When you go back and look at it, though, 35 runs, 261 passing yards, 7.5 yards per attempt. But, like, Kyler Murray was at 7.8 yards per attempt, and he had 2 big plays. That number is heavily, heavily skewed. The Cowboys ended up putting in Ben DiNucci, and, that's when you knew the game was over. Dallas got ran over by the Cardinals. The Cardinals next week go on to face up against... Oh, yeah, hold on. I have more to say about Dallas, actually, because I wrote a pretty extensive amount of notes here. I kind of already talked about this, though, but Zeke fumbling... I mean, he's probably not the best back on his team. Like, I've been flirting with that idea for about most of the offseason. Like, behind that O-line, well, the O-line was actually pretty shit today, but, normally behind that O-line, I mean, Zeke finished the game with a good per carry, though it came at the cost of how many fumbles? Like 3? He's not been good. If Zeke hadn't fumbled the ball 12 times in 6 games, this Dallas team might actually have like 4 wins or some shit. I don't even know. But their defense continues to be absolute dog shit. Coverage bust. Trayvon Diggs getting put on a blender by DeAndre Hopkins after the catch. Like, that's tough. That's crazy. This was an all-out, all-around shit performance from Dallas. Now, granted, the Cardinals and Kyler Murray weren't that much better. They just played up against a team that I didn't really show up to play. Dallas could bounce back in a pretty big way against Washington, though. Maybe. Because Washington's much worse than Arizona. And that line that was 3 points might even go down. So that's might even go down to like 2.5 or some shit. I don't even like 3 on the dot. Which in that case, it has to be an auto bet on Dallas at that point. And Arizona plays Seattle next week. The line for that game probably closed, and it's already 3 points. They might come into that game as like 2.5 point dogs against Seattle, which is an auto bet on Seattle, basically. Like, Arizona's not that good. I mean, they played up against a really bad Cowboys defense that didn't even show up to play today, and they only had 40 yards outside of 2 plays, in terms of passing at least, and similarly in the running game as well. I mean, Kyler Murray ran the ball well. He always has. I mean, had 2 rushing touchdowns, or not had 2. He had 1 reversed. I mean, 1 negated. The play calling for Dallas was all around shit, though. Like, they kept running fades at the goal line, which, by the way, is probably the most inefficient play at the goal line. They threw like 3 fades in a row to Michael Gallup or some shit like that. Like, it wasn't good. It really wasn't good. Dalton, he had 2 INTs. One of which wasn't necessarily his fault, but also, to go with the one that wasn't his fault, he had an egregious, absolutely egregious interception dropped by Jordan Hicks, or I think it was Jordan Hicks, where he basically he just threw the ball right at Jordan Hicks. The pass protection was admittedly, like, awful, but, he did force a lot of his pressure by hesitating and taking forever in the pocket, which definitely hurt the team. And you know what? Dallas might just be like terrible. And into the Cardinals, not even like the Cardinals had a great offensive performance. They just beat the shit out of them. And they didn't even play that good. I mean, I don't think either of these teams are that good, though. But Dallas continues to just be bad, I guess. I don't even know, man. This was a terrible performance all around. Like, the players didn't play that well. The coaching was abysmal. I mean, there was better coaching candidates than McCarthy, honestly. I mean, Bieniemy is still available if you really want to reverse your decision. Like, it turns out paying $90 million to a running back and missing out on signing your cornerback Byron Jones, your best defensive player or your most valuable defensive player, and Byron Jones, and missing out kind of on signing your quarterback because you decided to pay $90 million to a running back that's heavily tied to his supporting cast and blocking in front of him, like almost every running back is, but there's a couple exceptions like Nick Chubb. And you give Nick Chubb a great offensive line. He's like 5.9 per carry right now, which is insane. But like Zeke has never been that high with a great offensive line. I think that shows you the difference between a truly elite that's the difference between a truly elite running back and Ezekiel Elliott. Now, per carry isn't the greatest measure, but it's a better measure than yards, I think, because yards are more driven by attempts than it is like yards and offensive line. But like yards after contact, like I think Chubb has more yards after contact than Zeke has in total per attempt. And like at one point in time before this week, Chubb and Hunt were 1 and 2 in yards after contact. But yeah, that's why you don't pay $90 million to a running back. You lose Byron Jones on a secondary that was already not that great with him. He was by far the best player in the secondary. They miss him dearly now. You end up not being able to lock down your quarterback because you paid $90 million to a running back that's not even that damn good. And then you draft him at number 4 when Jalen Ramsey was on the board. It's tough. That's what bad roster building can do, man. But then the draft is a hard thing to nail. Because then you do that, then you come back a few years later, granted, like 4 years later, but then you come and get CeeDee Lamb, Trayvon Diggs, who in the second round, which was definitely a better pick than in the first round. Like, I didn't think he was a first-round caliber corner. He's getting put in a fucking blender this year. He's been bad. I'm just going on a rant on Dallas at this point. I'm going to end the podcast here. I'm done talking about this absolute fucking disaster. But, yeah, we're coming every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 a.m. Hope you guys enjoy the content. You know what I'm saying? Hit the subscribe button, like, comment, all that. Notification bell to get notified whenever I drop a video. Mock draft coming after week number 8, which is actually creeping up way sooner than I actually expected. So, yeah, I'm out. Peace.